The blood on Rebecca Lawson's hands was not her own, and if anyone discovered why, she would hang before sunset. She scrubbed harder at the wooden basin in her kitchen, watching the pink water swirl as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows through her modest home on the eastern edge of Oregon City, Oregon. It was 1858, and the town had grown rapidly with settlers pushing westward, bringing their laws, their prejudices, and their peculiar institution with them even to this northern territory. Rebecca had never intended to become what she was. 3 years ago, she had simply offered shelter to a terrified young woman who appeared at her door in the dead of night, shaking and bleeding from the lash marks across her back. That woman had been the first of many. Now, beneath Rebecca's floorboards lay a carefully constructed crawlspace that had housed dozens of souls fleeing bondage, each staying anywhere from a few nights to several weeks before moving north toward Canada and freedom. She dried her hands on her apron and glanced at the rug in her sitting room that concealed the hidden door. Below, a family of 3 waited in silence. A mother, father, and their 12-year-old son who had arrived 4 nights prior, guided by the careful network of abolitionists who knew Rebecca only as a safe house along the route. They would move on tomorrow night if the weather held and if no one grew suspicious. But someone had grown suspicious. Rebecca had noticed Flynn Northwood watching her house for the past week. He was new to Oregon City, having arrived about a month ago from somewhere back east. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of storm clouds, he worked odd jobs around town, breaking horses, repairing fences, whatever paid. He kept to himself mostly, which was why his sudden interest in her comings and goings unnerved her. She had seen him yesterday morning, leaning against the post outside the general store, his gaze following her as she purchased extra flour and salt pork. The same provisions she always bought when people were hiding below. She had been careful, had always been careful, but Flynn Northwood watched her with an intensity that suggested he saw more than others did. The knock at her door that evening nearly stopped her heart. Rebecca smoothed her dark blonde hair, tucked a loose strand behind her ear, and approached the door with measured steps. She was 24 years old, had been widowed for 5 years after a brief marriage to a man who died of cholera, and lived alone in this house her late husband had built. Respectable women did not answer their doors to strange men after dark, but she had little choice. Ignoring the knock might draw more attention. She opened the door 6 inches, enough to see Flynn Northwood standing on her porch, hat in his hands. "Miss Lawson," he said, his voice a low rumble that carried a hint of an accent she could not quite place. "Eastern, certainly. Perhaps Philadelphia or Boston, Mr. Northwood. It is rather late for social calls." "I am aware. I apologize for the impropriety." He shifted his weight, and Rebecca noticed the way his eyes darted past her, scanning what he could see of her home. "I wanted to speak with you about a matter of some importance." Her mouth went dry. "I cannot imagine what matter we might have to discuss." "I think you can." His gaze met hers directly, and she saw something there that was not accusation, but neither was it friendly. "May I come in? What I have to say should not be said on your doorstep where anyone might hear." Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to slam the door and bolt it. But if he meant to expose her, he would have already done so. The fact that he stood here, asking for privacy, suggested something else. Rebecca stepped back and allowed him to enter. Flynn Northwood was larger than she had realized, and his presence filled her small sitting room. He glanced around with that same careful attention, his gaze lingering on the rug that covered the hidden door. Rebecca's heart hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I will be direct, Miss Lawson," he said, turning to face her. "You have been hiding runaways beneath your floorboards. I know this because I have watched you for the past week, and because I recognize the signs. The extra provisions, the way you keep your curtains drawn in the evenings, the visitors who arrive after dark and are never seen leaving by daylight." The room tilted slightly. Rebecca gripped the back of her chair to steady herself. "I do not know what you think you have observed, but I assure you, there is a family down there right now," he interrupted, his voice still low but firm. "A mother, father, and a boy. They arrived 4 nights ago, just after midnight. You let them in through your back door." She could not breathe, could not think. This was how it ended then. After 3 years of success, of helping nearly 40 people find their way to freedom, she would be discovered by a drifter who had been in town less than a month. "What do you want?" The words came out barely above a whisper. "Money, I do not have much, but I do not want your money." Flynn took a step closer and she forced herself not to retreat. "I want to help." Rebecca stared at him. "Help?" "Yes." He set his hat on the small table by the door. "I have some experience with this work. Back in Philadelphia, I was involved with the Vigilance Committee. I helped organize safe houses and escorts for people traveling the routes north. I came west because things became too dangerous and I needed to disappear for a while. But when I saw what you were doing here, alone and unprotected, I knew I had to offer my assistance. It could be a trap, an elaborate ruse to get her to confess." Rebecca's mind raced through possibilities. "Why should I believe you?" "Because if I meant to turn you in, I would have already done so." Flynn's expression softened slightly. "Because I know the password, the one used by conductors on the railroad, a friend with friends." Rebecca's knees nearly gave out. That was the correct phrase, the one spoken by those who moved in the same dangerous circles she did. But still, caution had kept her alive this long. "Anyone might have learned those words," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "True. But not everyone would know that the response is the friends of a friend are my friends, and not everyone would know that safe houses mark their doors with a quilt bearing a specific pattern, the one you have hanging in your bedroom window facing the backwoods." He paused. "I saw it when I circled your property 2 nights ago. The bear's paw pattern. I know what it means." She had hung that quilt 6 months ago, replacing the previous signal. The network had sent word of the new marker, ensuring that guides would know where to bring those who needed shelter. Flynn Northwood should not know this unless he was truly part of the movement. "Even if what you say is true," Rebecca said slowly, "why would you risk yourself to help me? You said you came west to escape danger. Getting involved in this again seems foolish." Flynn ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that seemed born of frustration. "Because this work is not something you simply walk away from. Because I have seen too much suffering to stand idle when I might make a difference. And because, Miss Lawson, what you are doing here is extraordinary and exceptionally dangerous, and you need someone watching your back." She wanted to believe him, wanted it so desperately that it frightened her. For 3 years, she had carried this burden alone, had lain awake countless nights terrified that she would make a mistake, that someone would discover her secret, that the people she sheltered would be captured and returned to horrors she could barely imagine. The thought of having an ally, someone who understood the work and its risks, was almost overwhelming. "There are slave catchers in town," Flynn continued. 2 men arrived yesterday. They are staying at the boarding house and asking questions about missing property. They have descriptions of the family you are hiding." Ice flooded Rebecca's veins. "How do you know this?" "Because I made it my business to know. I was at the saloon last night when they came in. They have papers, legal documents claiming ownership of 3 souls matching the descriptions of the people in your cellar. They plan to search properties throughout the area." We have to move them tonight, Rebecca said, already calculating. There is a safe house 2 days north, near Salem. If we can get them there, it is too risky to travel tonight. There is a full moon and those men have others helping them search the roads. We would be spotted. Flynn stepped closer. But I have an idea. If they come here to search, we need to make sure they find nothing. The hiding space is well concealed, Rebecca said, though doubt crept into her voice. I am sure it is. But professional slave catchers know all the tricks. They will tap floors listening for hollow spaces. They will move furniture and pull up rugs. He glanced again at the rug covering the hidden door. We need a distraction, something that will keep them occupied and away from this house long enough to move your guests to a secondary location. What kind of distraction? Flynn's expression turned grim. The kind that requires trust. You need to trust that I am who I say I am, and I need to trust that you will follow my lead without question. Can you do that? Rebecca studied his face. He had strong features, a straight nose, a jaw that suggested stubbornness. But his eyes held something she recognized because she saw it in her own mirror each morning, determination born of conviction, and a weariness that came from carrying heavy secrets. I can, she said. They worked through the night. Flynn revealed that he had been preparing for this possibility, had already scouted alternative hiding places in the woods beyond town. There was an abandoned trapper's cabin about 3 miles northeast, overgrown and forgotten. He had cleared it out, stocked it with basic provisions. It would serve as a temporary shelter until the slave catchers moved on or could be thrown off the trail. But first, they had to move the family without being seen. Rebecca went to the hidden door and knocked 3 times, then twice, then once. The signal. She heard movement below, then the soft scrape of the bolt being drawn back. She lifted the rug and the door, revealing the narrow ladder that led down into darkness. A face appeared in the lamplight she lowered. The woman, Sarah, looked up with wide, fearful eyes. She was perhaps 30, with skin the color of polished mahogany and hair wrapped in a faded scarf. It is safe to come up, Rebecca said gently, but we need to move quickly. There are men in town looking for you. Sarah climbed up first, followed by her husband Marcus, a tall man with powerful shoulders and hands calloused from years of labor. Last came their son, Daniel, who clutched a small carved horse, the only possession he had carried from his previous life. They froze when they saw Flynn. This is Flynn Northwood, Rebecca said quickly. He is here to help. He is part of the network. Marcus positioned himself between Flynn and his family, his body tense. I have heard promises before. I am asking you to trust me, Flynn said, his voice steady. I know you have no reason to, but we have very little time. There are slave catchers in Oregon City with your descriptions. If you stay here, you will be found. I have prepared a place where you can hide safely until we can arrange passage north. Why would you help us? Sarah asked, her arm around Daniel. Flynn met her gaze directly. Because it is the right thing to do. Because you deserve freedom as much as any person walking this earth. And because I will be damned if I let you be dragged back into chains without a fight. Something passed between them, an understanding that needed no further words. Marcus nodded slowly. What do we need to do? They moved like shadows through the darkness, Flynn leading the way with Rebecca bringing up the rear. The family stayed low, following Flynn's path through the trees that bordered the eastern edge of town. The full moon Flynn had warned about now worked in their favor, providing enough light to navigate by without need for lanterns that might give them away. The cabin appeared suddenly, tucked into a hollow between 2 hills and so overgrown with blackberry brambles that Rebecca would have walked past it unseeing. Flynn had cut a narrow path through the thorns, barely wide enough for single-file passage. Inside, the cabin was sparse but clean. Flynn had indeed provisioned it with blankets, food, and water. A small cast iron stove sat in the corner, its pipe extending through a hole in the roof. "You can make a fire during the day if you keep it small," Flynn instructed Marcus. "The smoke will dissipate in the trees. But nothing after dark that might be visible. I will come every morning before dawn to bring fresh water and food. Miss Lawson will continue her normal routine to avoid suspicion." "How long do we stay here?" Sarah asked, settling Daniel on one of the bedrolls Flynn had prepared. "A few days at most," Rebecca said. "Once the slave catchers move on or we can throw them off your trail, we will get you to the next station. From there, it is a clear run to the Canadian border." Marcus extended his hand to Flynn. "I do not know you, and I have learned to trust few white men. But you have my gratitude." Flynn shook his hand firmly. "Save your gratitude for when you are safe in Canada. Until then, stay quiet and stay hidden." They made their way back to town just as the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Rebecca's legs ached from the unfamiliar exertion, and her dress was torn in 2 places from the brambles. Flynn walked beside her, maintaining a careful distance that would appear proper should anyone see them. "You should go home and rest," he said as they neared her property. "I will keep watch to see if the slave catchers make any moves today." "Where will you be?" "Around." He gave her a slight smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his serious features into something almost boyish. "I have become very good at being invisible when I need to be." Rebecca studied him in the growing light. "Why did you really approach me, Mr. Northwood?" "The truth." His smile faded. "I told you the truth. You needed help. But there is more, is there not? You did not have to involve yourself. You could have simply moved on to another town." Flynn looked away, toward the horizon where the sun would soon break. "I had a sister, younger than me by 3 years, beautiful and kind and far too trusting. She fell in love with a man, a southern plantation owner who came north on business. He promised her the world, promised to free his slaves and move north permanently to be with her. She believed him." His jaw tightened. "She married him and moved to Virginia. Within a year, she was dead. The official story was fever, but her last letter to me told a different tale. She tried to help people escape from his plantation, and he found out. I could not prove what he did, but I know. I know he killed her for daring to defy him." Rebecca's heart clenched. "I am so sorry. I dedicated myself to this work in her memory. Every person I help reach freedom is a tribute to her. So when I saw what you were doing, saw you risking everything the way she did, I knew I could not stand by and do nothing." He turned back to her, and his eyes were fierce. "I will not let what happened to my sister happen to you, Miss Lawson. I will guard your door, your secret, and your life if necessary." The intensity of his words, the raw emotion behind them, left Rebecca speechless. She had been alone for so long, had shouldered this burden without complaint because she believed it necessary. To have someone offer not just help but protection, commitment, was something she had not dared to hope for. "Rebecca," she said softly. "You should call me Rebecca given the circumstances." "Flynn," he replied. "And given the circumstances, I think we are going to be spending a great deal of time together." The slave catchers came to her door that afternoon. Rebecca had spent the morning cleaning every trace of her nighttime activities, scrubbing the floor around the hidden door, rearranging furniture to make the room look undisturbed. She had hung fresh laundry in the yard, baked bread, done everything she normally would do on a Tuesday in late spring. When the knock came, she was prepared. 2 men stood on her porch, both carrying official-looking documents. The older one, perhaps 50 with graying hair and cold blue eyes, introduced himself as Silas Garrett. His companion was younger, maybe 30, with a cruel twist to his mouth and hands that rested too comfortably on the pistol at his hip. "Miss Lawson," Garrett said with exaggerated politeness, "we are here on official business. We have reason to believe you may have information regarding 3 fugitive slaves who passed through this area recently." "I am afraid I do not know anything about that," Rebecca replied, keeping her voice steady. "I live alone and keep to myself mostly. Of course, of course." Garrett's smile did not reach his eyes. "But you understand, we have a legal obligation to pursue our investigation thoroughly. Would you mind if we took a look around your property, just to rule out any possibility?" It was not truly a question. Rebecca had no legal right to refuse them, not with the Fugitive Slave Act giving them authority to search any property they deemed suspicious. Refusing would only make her look guilty. "Certainly," she said, stepping back, "though I assure you, you will find nothing of interest." They entered her home like predators scenting prey, their eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. Garrett moved through the sitting room while his companion checked the kitchen and bedroom. Rebecca stood still, her hands clasped in front of her, willing herself to remain calm. Garrett's foot nudged the rug that covered the hidden door. Rebecca's heart stopped. He bent down, pulled the rug aside, revealing the floorboards beneath. For a terrible moment, Rebecca thought she saw recognition in his eyes, thought he had spotted the nearly invisible seam that marked the door's edge. Then another knock sounded at her door. Loud, insistent, Garrett straightened, annoyance crossing his features. "Are you expecting someone?" "No," Rebecca managed, moving to answer it. Flynn Northwood stood on her porch, and he looked furious. "Miss Lawson," he said loudly, his voice carrying, "I apologize for the disturbance, but I need to speak with you about the damage your livestock did to my fence line this morning. 3 of your chicken got into my yard and destroyed my vegetable garden." Rebecca blinked, struggling to follow his lead. She did not have livestock, and Flynn lived in a boarding house with no yard or garden. But she understood immediately what he was doing. "I am so sorry, Mr. Northwood," she said, matching his volume. "I was not aware they had gotten loose. I will of course pay for any damages." "Damages?" Flynn pushed past her into the house, then stopped short when he saw the 2 slave catchers. "Who the hell are you?" Garrett drew himself up. "We are operating under federal authority. This is none of your concern." "Federal authority in a lady's home? What kind of authority?" Flynn moved closer to Rebecca, his body language protective. "Miss Lawson, are these men threatening you?" "They are searching for fugitive slaves," Rebecca said, playing her part. "They believe some may have passed through the area." Flynn snorted. "Fugitive slaves? In Oregon City? That is ridiculous. Everyone knows the routes run further east through Kansas and Nebraska." "You are wasting your time here." "And how would you know about the routes?" The younger slave catcher's hand moved to his pistol. "Because I read newspapers and I am not an idiot," Flynn shot back. "Also, because my cousin works for the railroad, the actual railroad, and he has mentioned the problems they have been having with runaways using the trains. None of those lines come through Oregon City." It was a masterful performance. Flynn positioned himself as an annoying, slightly ignorant cowboy with just enough information to sound credible, but not suspicious. He kept Garrett and his companion's attention focused on him, arguing about routes and laws and property rights, while Rebecca stood to the side, forgotten. After 20 minutes of increasingly heated debate, Garrett finally threw up his hands in frustration. "We have seen enough here. Miss Lawson, if you do hear anything about fugitives in the area, you are legally obligated to report it." "Of course," Rebecca said meekly. They left, but not before Garrett cast one last suspicious look at the sitting room floor. Flynn waited until they were well down the road before turning to Rebecca, his angry expression dissolving into concern. "Are you all right? Did they hurt you?" "I am fine." "They arrived, asked to search, and you appeared at exactly the right moment." Rebecca sagged against the door frame, the tension draining from her body. "How did you know they were here?" "I was watching from the trees across the road. When I saw them approach your house, I knew I had to create a distraction." He moved to the window, watching the slave catchers disappear around a bend. "They are not done. Garrett has a reputation. He is like a dog with a bone. He will not leave Oregon City until he is certain his quarry is not here." "How long will that take?" "Days. Maybe a week." Flynn turned back to her. "We need to be very careful. They will be watching you, watching for any sign that you are hiding something." "Then we maintain the appearance of normalcy," Rebecca said, her mind already working through the problem. "I continue my usual routine. You keep your distance publicly, so they do not associate us, and we wait until they give up or we can safely move the family north." "There is a problem with that plan." Flynn crossed his arms. "If we are not seen together, if I am not visibly around your property, who is going to stop Garrett from coming back here alone at night when there are no witnesses?" "He strikes me as the type who does not let legal niceties stop him from getting what he wants." Rebecca had not considered that. The thought of Garrett or his companion returning in the darkness, forcing their way in, perhaps doing worse than simply searching her home, sent a chill through her. "What do you suggest?" Flynn hesitated, then said carefully. "I suggest we give the town something to talk about besides fugitive slaves. We give them a romance." She stared at him. "What? Think about it. If people believe we are courting, my presence around your property becomes not only explainable but expected. I would have every right to be here, to watch over you, to be seen coming and going. It provides perfect cover." He held up a hand before she could protest. "It would be a performance, nothing more, but it would protect you and give me a legitimate reason to guard your door." "The gossip would be intense," Rebecca said slowly. "A widow entertaining the attention of a drifter cowboy. My reputation would be dissected over every tea table in town." "Is your reputation worth more than your life? Than the lives of the people you are trying to save?" He had a point. A harsh one, but valid. Rebecca had never cared much for the town gossips, and her reputation was already somewhat tarnished by her unusual living situation. A single woman, living alone, refusing offers of marriage from respectable men. Adding a supposed romance to the mix would scandalize some, but it would also normalize Flynn's presence. "How would we make it convincing?" she asked. "The same way any couple would. I call on you in the evenings. We are seen together in town occasionally. I do work around your property, repairs and such, the kind of things a suitor might do to be helpful." Flynn's expression was serious. "It does not have to be elaborate, just enough to establish a reason for me to be here." Rebecca considered the implications. It meant allowing him into her life in a way she had not permitted anyone since her husband's death. It meant trusting him not just with her secret, but with her daily existence. And it meant play-acting an emotion, a connection that could become dangerously real if she was not careful. But what choice did she have? "All right," she said. "We will try it, but there are rules. You do not come into my home after dark unless it is absolutely necessary for the work we are doing. You maintain proper distance in public, and this arrangement ends the moment the danger passes." "Agreed." Flynn extended his hand. "Partners." Rebecca shook it, feeling the roughness of his palm, the strength in his grip. "Partners." The performance began the next day. Flynn arrived at her house in mid-morning, carrying a toolbox and wearing a friendly smile. He spent the afternoon repairing her front steps, which actually did need attention, and replacing a section of fence that had rotted. Several neighbors found excuses to walk past, their curiosity evident. By evening, when Flynn tipped his hat to her and left, promising to return the next day to fix her barn door, the gossip had already begun. Rebecca heard whispers at the general store the following morning, saw the speculative looks from the other women. Mrs. Patterson, who ran the boarding house and knew everything worth knowing in Oregon City, stopped her on the street. "I see you have acquired some help with your property, dear," she said, her eyes bright with interest. "Mr. Northwood has been kind enough to assist with repairs," Rebecca replied neutrally. He is quite handsome, is he not? And still young enough to be an acceptable match, I should think. You could do worse than a strong man willing to work hard." "I am not looking for a match, Mrs. Patterson. Simply some assistance with maintaining my home." Of course. But the older woman's smile suggested she did not believe a word of it. The slave catchers, meanwhile, continued their search through Oregon City and the surrounding areas. Rebecca saw them twice more, once questioning people outside the church, and another time speaking with the sheriff. They had expanded their investigation, posting notices describing the fugitive slaves and offering a reward for information. Flynn kept Rebecca informed of their movements. He had made himself useful around town, taking jobs that allowed him to move freely and hear the latest news. In the evenings, he would stop by her house under the pretense of courtship, and they would discuss strategy in low voices while maintaining the appearance of polite conversation. "They are getting frustrated," Flynn reported 3 days after the search had begun. "Garrett apparently had a tip that the family was in this area, but they have found no trace of them. He is considering moving his search north toward Salem." "Good. Once they are gone, we can move the family to the next station." Rebecca poured coffee for them both, a domestic gesture that felt strange and natural at once. "How are they doing at the cabin?" "Nervous but safe. I took them fresh supplies this morning before dawn. Daniel is getting restless, poor boy. It is hard for a child to stay quiet and hidden for so long." Rebecca's heart ached for the family. She had seen too many children forced into such circumstances, their innocence stolen by a system that treated human beings as property. "We will get them to safety. We have to." Flynn reached across the table and covered her hand with his. It was a gesture meant to comfort, but it sent an unexpected warmth through her. "We will, I promise you." She looked at their joined hands, then up at his face. In the lamplight, his features seemed softer, more open. Over the past few days, she had learned small things about him. He took his coffee black. He had a habit of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. He whistled tunelessly when he worked. Small, ordinary details that made him feel less like a stranger and more like someone she was beginning to know. "Why did you never marry?" she asked suddenly, then felt her face flush. "Forgive me, that was too personal. No, it is all right." Flynn leaned back, though he did not withdraw his hand entirely. "I was engaged once back in Philadelphia, before my sister died. After that, I threw myself into the work of the Vigilance Committee and there was no room for anything else. And then I had to leave, and I have been moving ever since." He paused. "What about you? You were married young, I understand." "Too young. I was 18, he was 22. Thomas was a good man, but we barely knew each other when we wed. We had less than a year together before the cholera took him." Rebecca stared into her coffee cup. "I mourned him, but truthfully I also felt relief." "Is that terrible?" "No, it is honest. After he died, I discovered I liked living alone, liked making my own decisions. When I started this work, I knew I could not do it with a husband who might object or worse, report me to the authorities. So I have remained unmarried." "Do you regret it?" Flynn asked quietly. "Sometimes. On cold nights when the house feels too empty, or when I see families together and remember I will likely never have children." She met his gaze. "But then someone like Sarah and Marcus and Daniel come to my door, and I know this work is more important than my own loneliness." "You are remarkable," Flynn said, and the admiration in his voice was unmistakable. "What you have done, what you continue to do despite the risks, it is extraordinary." "I am only doing what anyone with a conscience should do. But most people do not. Most people look the other way, tell themselves it is not their problem, that they cannot make a difference. You decided to make a difference." The intensity in his eyes made Rebecca's breath catch. She became suddenly aware that they were sitting very close, that his hand still rested near hers on the table, that the room felt smaller and warmer than it had moments before. A sharp knock at the door shattered the moment. They both froze. It was nearly 8 o'clock, too late for social calls. Flynn moved quickly, positioning himself between Rebecca and the door, his hand moving to the knife he wore at his belt. "Miss Lawson," a young voice called. "It is Tom Harper. I have a message for you." Rebecca recognized the voice of the blacksmith's apprentice, a boy of maybe 16. She opened the door cautiously. Tom stood there, shifting nervously from foot to foot. "Sorry to disturb you, madam, but the doctor sent me. He needs you to come to the Whitman place right away. Mrs. Whitman has gone into labor and is asking for you." Rebecca was known in town for her skill with herbs and healing, often called upon to assist with births when the doctor needed help. It was part of her cover, actually, explaining her odd hours and frequent purchases of medical supplies. "Tell him I will be there within the hour," Rebecca said. She turned to Flynn. "I need to go. Mrs. Whitman is a week early and had difficulties with her last birth." "I will walk you there," Flynn said immediately. "That is not necessary." "It is dark and late. I will walk you there," he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. They made their way through the quiet streets to the Whitman farmstead on the western edge of town. The birth took most of the night, a difficult labor that required all of Rebecca's skill and the doctor's experience. By the time the sun rose, a healthy baby girl had entered the world, and Mrs. Whitman was resting comfortably. Flynn had waited outside the entire time. When Rebecca emerged, exhausted and covered in the evidence of her night's work, she found him sitting on the porch steps, keeping watch. "You did not have to stay," she said softly. "Yes, I did." He stood, offering his arm. "Come on, let us get you home." They walked in comfortable silence as the town began to wake around them. Rebecca felt the bone-deep weariness that came after a long birth, but also the satisfaction of a life safely brought into the world. Flynn's presence beside her felt natural, protective without being overbearing. "You do that often?" he asked. "Assist with births, when I am needed. It is good work, helping bring life into the world. A counterbalance to the other thing I do, which is about preserving life that others would destroy." "You have a calling," Flynn said. "More than one, it seems." They reached her house just as Silas Garrett emerged from the boarding house across the street. The slave catcher's eyes narrowed when he saw them together, clearly noting Rebecca's disheveled state and Flynn's protective posture. "Mr. Northwood, Miss Lawson. Early morning walk." Garrett's tone was insinuating. "Miss Lawson was attending a birth," Flynn replied coolly. "I accompanied her home as any gentleman would. How convenient. You seem to be spending a great deal of time with Miss Lawson lately." "I am courting her. Is that a crime?" Garrett's smile was unpleasant. "Not at all. Though it does make one wonder what else might be going on under the cover of such attentions." Flynn took a step toward the slave catcher, and Rebecca quickly placed a hand on his arm. "Mr. Garrett, I assure you there is nothing untoward occurring. Mr. Northwood has been a perfect gentleman." "I am sure he has." Garrett tipped his hat mockingly. "Enjoy your day, Miss Lawson." As he walked away, Rebecca felt Flynn's muscles tense beneath her hand. "Do not let him provoke you," she said quietly. "That is exactly what he wants. I know. But I do not like the way he looks at you, or the implications in his words." They entered her house, and Rebecca immediately moved to wash her hands and face. Flynn paced the sitting room like a caged animal. "We need to move the family soon," he said. "Garrett is getting desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. Give it 2 more days. If Garrett has found nothing by then, he will have to move on. There are other territories to search, other leads to follow. He cannot afford to waste time here indefinitely." Flynn stopped pacing. "And if he does not move on, then we create a reason for him to leave." Rebecca dried her hands, her mind already forming a plan. "We send him false information, a tip about his fugitives being spotted elsewhere, far enough away to pull him off the trail but plausible enough to be believable. That could work. I could arrange it, make sure the information comes from a source he would trust." Flynn moved to the window, checking the street outside. "We would need to time it carefully, make sure the family is moved before he realizes the information is false and comes back." They spent the next hour working out the details, their heads bent together over a map of Oregon Territory. It was purely practical planning, but Rebecca could not help noticing how well they worked together, how easily they anticipated each other's thoughts and suggestions. It was a partnership in the truest sense, built on mutual respect and shared purpose. Finally, Flynn stood to leave. "Get some rest. You have been up all night. What about you? You were awake as long as I was." "I will sleep later. Right now, I need to make some arrangements for our plan." He hesitated at the door. "Rebecca, what Garrett implied earlier about us, about my intentions. I want you to know I know," she interrupted gently. "This is an arrangement, nothing more. I understand that." Something flickered across Flynn's face, an expression she could not quite read. "Right. An arrangement." He put on his hat. "I will return this evening with an update." After he left, Rebecca found she could not sleep despite her exhaustion. She lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the night's events, the way Flynn had stayed with her all night without complaint, the protective way he positioned himself between her and potential threats, the warmth of his hand on hers. It was just an arrangement, she reminded herself. A practical solution to a dangerous problem. The feeling stirring in her chest, the way her heart lifted when she saw him, the comfort she felt in his presence, those were simply byproducts of the intensity of their situation. Nothing more. She almost believed it. Flynn's plan worked perfectly. 2 days later, a traveler passing through town mentioned to Garrett that he had seen a family matching the fugitive's description in a settlement 30 miles east. The traveler, actually a member of the abolitionist network Flynn had contacted, was convincing enough that Garrett packed up immediately and headed east with his companion. The moment they were gone, Flynn and Rebecca moved into action. They waited until nightfall, then made their way to the hidden cabin. The family was ready, their meager possessions gathered. "We are taking you to Salem tonight," Flynn explained to Marcus. "There is a Quaker family there who will shelter you for a few days, then arrange passage on a ship heading north to Washington Territory and eventually Canada. It is a longer route than the overland journey, but safer given how many slave catchers are operating in the territory right now." The journey to Salem took 8 hours, traveling by night through back roads and forest paths. Flynn drove the wagon, with Rebecca beside him and the family hidden under blankets and supplies in the back. It was grueling, every sound in the darkness a potential threat, every glimpse of light a possible danger. But they reached Salem without incident, delivering the family to a modest farm outside the town limits. The Quaker couple who answered the door embraced Sarah and Marcus like family, immediately welcoming them and young Daniel into their home. "Thank you," Sarah said to Rebecca, tears streaming down her face. "You risked everything for us. I will never forget you." Rebecca hugged her tightly. "Be safe, be free. That is thanks enough." Marcus shook Flynn's hand. "You are a good man, both of you good people. I pray God blesses you for what you have done." As they drove away, Rebecca felt the familiar mixture of satisfaction and sorrow that came with every successful passage. She had helped another family toward freedom, but she would never know if they truly made it, never hear whether they reached Canada safely or were recaptured along the way. It required a certain kind of faith to do this work. Faith that the outcome justified the risks, that freedom was worth fighting for even when the end result remained unknown. "You are quiet," Flynn said after an hour on the road. "I was thinking about them, hoping they make it all the way. They will. The network north of here is solid. They will be in Canada within a month." He glanced at her. "You should be proud. You saved them." "We saved them. I could not have done it without you." Flynn was silent for a moment. "I have been thinking about that, about us working together. It has been effective, has it not?" "Very," Rebecca agreed. "So I have a proposal, not the courtship kind," he added quickly, and she thought she heard nervousness in his voice. "A partnership. A real one. I stay in Oregon City, continue helping you with the work. We could do more together than either of us could alone. You have the safe house and the local connections. I have experience and the ability to move more freely. Together, we could establish a more effective station on the route." Rebecca's heart began to race. "You would stay, give up your traveling." "I came west to disappear, to escape the danger I was in. But I have been here a month now, and I realize I do not want to keep running. I want to stand and fight to make a difference again, and I want to do it here with you." He kept his eyes on the road. "If you will have me as a partner." "What about the pretense? The supposed courtship we have been using for cover. We keep it. As far as the town knows we are courting. It gives me a reason to be around, to have a legitimate presence at your property. Eventually, we might even consider making it official, a marriage of convenience that would further protect both of us and the work." A marriage of convenience. The words should have filled her with relief, should have made this easy to accept as the practical arrangement it was. Instead, Rebecca felt an unexpected pang of disappointment. "Let me think about it," she said finally. "It is a significant decision. Of course, take all the time you need." They rode the rest of the way back to Oregon City in silence. Dawn was breaking as they reached the outskirts of town, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Flynn drove directly to Rebecca's house, helping her down from the wagon with his usual courtesy. "Get some rest," he said. "I will check in later to make sure Garrett has not returned." Rebecca watched him drive away, her emotions in turmoil. She wanted to say yes to his proposal, wanted the partnership and the protection and the simple pleasure of his company. But she was afraid. Afraid of needing him too much, of the pretend courtship becoming something real and complicated, of losing the independence she had fought so hard to maintain. She had built her life around solitude and secrets. Letting someone in, truly in, was terrifying. The next few weeks passed in a strange routine. Flynn took a job at the stable, which gave him legitimate work and income while allowing him to keep his ears open for information. He continued to visit Rebecca in the evenings, maintaining the appearance of courtship. They fell into an easy rhythm, partners in the truest sense, even as they danced around the question of making that partnership permanent. 2 more families passed through Rebecca's safe house during that time, and Flynn's assistance proved invaluable. He scouted routes, gathered intelligence on slave catcher movements, and provided the muscle needed for the more physically demanding aspects of the work. Together, they were more effective than Rebecca had been alone, moving people through more quickly and safely. But the closer they worked, the harder it became to maintain the pretense that this was purely professional. Rebecca found herself looking forward to Flynn's evening visits with an eagerness that had nothing to do with the work. She noticed small things about him. The way he always brought her wildflowers picked from the fields outside town, the way he remembered she preferred tea to coffee in the evenings, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. And she caught herself wondering what it would be like if the courtship were real. If his touches, always respectful and brief, meant more than simple partnership. If the future they were building together included more than just shared dangerous work. She was falling in love with him. The realization came one evening as she watched him repair her woodshed, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sweat dampening his hair. He looked up and caught her staring, and the smile he gave her made her heart skip. This was dangerous. More dangerous than hiding runaways or defying federal law. Because if she admitted her feelings and he did not share them, if she had misread every gesture and kind word, it would shatter the partnership they had built. Rebecca, Flynn had set down his tools and was walking toward her. Is something wrong? No, I was just thinking. About your proposal, the partnership. He stopped in front of her close enough that she could see the flecks of green in his gray eyes. And, I want to say yes. I want you to stay to continue working together, but I need to know something first. She gathered her courage. Is this truly just about the work? Is a marriage of convenience, if we took that step, all you would want from me? Flynn's expression shifted, something intense and almost vulnerable crossing his features. Do you want the polite answer or the honest one? The honest one. Always the honest one. He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. The honest answer is that this stopped being just about the work for me weeks ago, that I find myself making excuses to spend time with you beyond what is necessary for our missions. That I lie awake at night thinking about you, worrying about you, wanting you. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone. The honest answer is that I am in love with you, Rebecca Lawson, and a marriage of convenience would break my heart because I want so much more than convenience. Rebecca's breath caught. Flynn. But, he continued, lowering his hands, I will take whatever you are willing to give. Partnership, friendship, a marriage on paper only if that is what you need, because being near you in any capacity is better than the alternative. You fool, Rebecca whispered. Then she rose on her toes and kissed him. For a heartbeat, Flynn seemed frozen with surprise. Then his arms came around her, pulling her close as he kissed her back with a passion that made her dizzy. It was not gentle or tentative. It was fierce and honest and full of weeks of suppressed longing. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Flynn rested his forehead against hers. I take it that means you feel the same. I have been falling in love with you since the night you appeared on my doorstep and offered to help, Rebecca admitted. I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude or the intensity of the work we do, but it is more than that, so much more. Then marry me. Not for convenience, not for cover, but because you want to build a life with me, a real life. Yes, Rebecca said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They were wed 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Patterson and the blacksmith serving as witnesses. The town gossips declared themselves vindicated in their predictions, and several of the older women told Rebecca how fortunate she was to have found such a fine young man. If only they knew, Rebecca thought as she and Flynn stood before the preacher and exchanged vows. If they knew the real reasons they had come together, the dangerous work that had forged their bond, They would be horrified rather than approving. But Flynn's hand was steady as he slipped the simple gold band onto her finger, and his eyes held such love and promise that Rebecca felt her throat tighten with emotion. This was real. Against all odds, in the midst of danger and deception, they had found something genuine and precious. Their wedding night was spent not in passionate celebration, but in moving another family through the safe house, a reminder that their lives together would always be complicated by the work they had chosen. But later, in the early hours of morning when they finally climbed the stairs to Rebecca's bedroom, now theirs, Flynn pulled her close and kissed her with a tenderness that made her feel cherished and safe. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "My brave, beautiful wife." "I love you too," Rebecca replied, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones. "My partner in all things." The months that followed were both the happiest and most challenging of Rebecca's life. Having Flynn as a true partner in the work transformed their operation. They established better systems, created multiple hiding places, and developed a network of trusted contacts throughout Oregon Territory. By the end of their first year together, they had helped 43 people reach freedom. But the work grew more dangerous as tensions between North and South escalated. Slave catchers became more aggressive, backed by increasingly harsh federal laws. There were close calls, nights when Rebecca was certain they would be discovered, moments when Flynn had to physically confront men who threatened their charges. Through it all, their love deepened. Rebecca discovered that Flynn had a wicked sense of humor that emerged once he felt comfortable, that he could make her laugh even in the darkest moments. Flynn learned that Rebecca had a stubborn streak that rivaled his own, and that when she believed in something, she was immovable as stone. They argued sometimes, fierce, whispered debates in the night about risks and precautions. But they always found their way back to each other, to the fundamental trust and respect that formed the foundation of their marriage. In the spring of 1860, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. The realization filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. She had wanted children for so long, had mourned the possibility that her work would prevent her from ever becoming a mother. But now, carrying Flynn's child, she had to confront the reality that their dangerous activities put not just them at risk, but this new life as well. "We should stop," Flynn said when she told him, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. "At least until after the baby is born. It is too dangerous for you to continue. People still need help," Rebecca argued. "We cannot simply stop because you are carrying our child." "Yes, we can, we should." Flynn's expression was firm. "I will not risk you or the baby, Rebecca. The work is important, but you are more important. You are everything." They compromised. Rebecca agreed to step back from the more active aspects of the work, limiting her role to providing information and supplies while Flynn handled the actual movement of fugitives. It chafed at her, being sidelined even for such a good reason, but she could not deny the sense of relief that came with knowing she was protecting the life growing inside her. Their son was born in January of 1861, a week after Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and the country teetered on the edge of civil war. They named him Thomas, after Rebecca's late first husband, and Andrew, after Flynn's father. Holding her son for the first time, seeing Flynn's face light up with wonder and love, Rebecca felt a profound sense of hope despite the darkness gathering on the horizon. This child, born from a love forged in the fight for freedom, represented the future they were working toward. A future where no person was owned by another, where families could not be torn apart by the whims of slave owners, where children like Thomas Andrew Northwood could grow up in a world defined by justice rather than oppression. "He is perfect," Flynn whispered, touching their son's tiny hand with one finger. "Thank you for him. Thank you for this life we have built." "Thank you for finding me," Rebecca replied, "for being brave enough to knock on my door that night and offer to help, for loving me." The war came in April with the bombardment of Fort Sumter. Oregon, far from the fighting, nevertheless felt the reverberations. Families divided over loyalty to North or South. Young men volunteered for service. And the work of the Underground Railroad took on new urgency, as enslaved people in border states fled north in increasing numbers. Flynn resumed the work with Rebecca's blessing, though she made him promise to be careful, to not take unnecessary risks. With a son to raise and a wife who loved him, he had more to lose than ever before. The years of war were hard. Food grew scarce. News from the eastern battlefields filtered in slowly and often carried tales of terrible losses. Rebecca threw herself into nursing work, tending to wounded soldiers who made their way west to recover. Flynn continued moving fugitives north, his network expanding as more people committed to the cause of abolition. Through it all, they held fast to each other and to the principles that had brought them together. On the darkest nights, when the news was bad and the future seemed uncertain, they would sit together after Thomas was asleep and remind each other why they fought. For freedom, for justice, for the world they wanted their son to inherit. The Emancipation Proclamation came in 1863, and Rebecca wept with joy when she read Lincoln's words. It was not complete freedom, not yet, but it was a step toward the future they had worked for. Flynn gathered her in his arms and they danced in their kitchen, celebrating a victory that had cost so much but meant everything. The war ended in April of 1865. When news of Lee's surrender reached Oregon City, the town erupted in celebration. Rebecca and Flynn stood on their porch, Flynn's arms around her and little Thomas, now 4 years old, bouncing excitedly at their feet. The work they had done in secret for 7 years could now be acknowledged, could be part of the historical record of how freedom had been won. Some in town were shocked when the truth of the Northwoods' activities came out. Others claimed they had suspected all along. A few, whose sympathies had lain with the South, made angry accusations. But the tide of history had turned, and Rebecca and Flynn stood on the right side of it. In the years that followed, they built a different kind of life. Flynn opened a ranch outside Oregon City, raising horses and cattle. Rebecca continued her nursing work and her assistance with births. They had 2 more children, daughters they named Sarah and Margaret, after the women who had inspired Rebecca's work. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who asked endless questions about his parents' past. When he was old enough to understand, they told him about the families they had hidden, the risks they had taken, the principles they had defended. "Were you scared?" Thomas asked one evening when he was 12, after Flynn had finished a story about a particularly close call with slave catchers. "Terrified," Flynn admitted, "but being scared did not mean we could stop doing what was right." "Your father is braver than he admits," Rebecca added, smiling at her husband. "He risked everything to help people he did not even know, simply because it was the right thing to do." "You both did," Thomas said loyally. Years passed. The children grew. The ranch prospered. Oregon City expanded and modernized. The Wild West of Rebecca's youth gradually transformed into something more settled and civilized. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Flynn surprised Rebecca with a gift. It was a photograph, old and faded, showing a family of 3 standing in front of a small home somewhere in Canada. The mother held a baby in her arms. The father had his hand on the shoulder of a young man, perhaps 18 or 19. And on the back, written in careful script, was a message to Rebecca and Flynn Northwood. "Thank you for our freedom. Thank you for our lives. Sarah, Marcus, and Daniel Freeman." Rebecca stared at the photograph, tears streaming down her face. "Freeman," she whispered. "They took that name." "They have 6 children now," Flynn said softly. "Daniel is married, has a baby girl. They wanted you to know they made it, that they built a good life with the freedom you helped give them." It was the greatest gift he could have given her. The confirmation that their work, their sacrifices, had mattered. That lives had been saved and futures secured, because they had been willing to hide runaways under the floorboards and guard the door against those who would reclaim them. "How did you find them?" Rebecca asked. "I have been looking for years, writing letters, making inquiries. When I finally tracked them down, they were so eager to send word to you, to let you know they never forgot." Flynn wrapped his arms around her. "They were not the only ones. I found records of 11 other families we helped. All of them made it to freedom. All of them remembered your kindness." Rebecca looked at the photograph, at the smiling faces of people who had been terrified refugees when she had known them and were now free citizens living without fear. This was what it had all been for. This was why they had risked everything. "We did good work," she said. "We did," Flynn agreed. "And we built a good life together. I would not change a single moment, even the terrifying ones, because they all led here to this life with you." Rebecca turned in his arms and kissed him, still feeling the flutter of excitement she had felt the first time they kissed in her yard so many years ago. He was grayer now, his face lined with the marks of time and hard work. But his eyes held the same love, the same devotion they had held when he first told her he loved her. "Neither would I," she said. "Not one single moment." They stood together on the porch of their home, watching the sunset paint the Oregon sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children's laughter drifted from inside the house. The ranch spread out before them, peaceful and prosperous. And in Rebecca's hand, she held the photograph of a family that represented dozens of others, all of whom had passed through her home and found their way to freedom. It had been a wild and dangerous path they had walked together, but it had led them here, to this moment of peace and love and satisfaction. They had faced down slave catchers and risked everything for principles they believed in. They had hidden runaways under the floorboards and guarded the door against those who would do harm. And in doing so, they had found each other and built a love strong enough to weather any storm. As twilight deepened, Flynn took Rebecca's hand, intertwining their fingers the way he had done countless times over 25 years of marriage. "Ready to go inside?" he asked. Rebecca looked once more at the photograph, then up at the man who had changed her life in every possible way. "Ready," she said. Together they walked into their home, into the life they had built together through courage, conviction, and an unwavering commitment to each other and to justice. The Wild West had tested them in ways they could never have imagined. But they had emerged stronger, their love forged in the fires of shared danger and common purpose. And as the door closed behind them, the sunset fading into night, Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that every risk had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every sleepless night, every close call with discovery, all of it had led to this fullness of life and love. She had hidden runaways under her floorboards for years. Flynn had discovered her secret and guarded her door. And in the process, they had found something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed: a partner, a love, a home. The years continued to pass with gentle grace. Thomas grew into a fine young man who studied law, determined to fight for justice in the courtroom the way his parents had fought for it in secret. Sarah became a teacher, dedicated to educating children of all backgrounds. Margaret followed in Rebecca's footsteps, training as a nurse and midwife. Flynn and Rebecca watched their children make their marks on the world with pride. In their children's choices, they saw the values they had tried to instill: compassion, courage, and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right regardless of the cost. As they aged, they became fixtures in Oregon City's history. People would point them out to visitors, telling stories of the brave couple who had risked everything to help fugitive slaves reach freedom. Some of the stories were exaggerated, growing taller with each retelling. But the core truth remained. Rebecca and Flynn Northwood had stood against injustice when it was dangerous to do so, and their actions had saved lives. On their 40th anniversary, the entire town threw them a celebration. The mayor gave a speech lauding their courage and moral conviction. Former runaways, now free citizens living throughout the Pacific Northwest, sent letters of gratitude. Their children and grandchildren gathered around them, a testament to the legacy of love they had created. That night, after the guests had gone home and the house was quiet, Rebecca and Flynn sat on their porch swing, rocking gently in the warm summer air. Rebecca's head rested on Flynn's shoulder, his arm around her waist. They fit together perfectly, the way they had for 4 decades. "Do you ever think about that first night?" Rebecca asked softly. "When you came to my door and told me you knew my secret?" "All the time," Flynn replied. "I think about how terrified you looked, how brave you were even in your fear. I think about how I knew even then that you were someone extraordinary. I thought you were going to turn me in. I was ready to run. Where would you have gone? I do not know. Somewhere, anywhere that I could keep doing the work." She smiled. "But then you said you wanted to help, and everything changed. Everything changed for me too. I came west looking for a place to hide, a way to escape my past. Instead, I found a purpose and a future." Flynn pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I found you." "We found each other," Rebecca corrected. "And we built something beautiful." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the ranch. Horses nickering in the stable, the distant hoot of an owl, the rustle of wind through the trees. This land, this life, this love, it was everything Rebecca had never known to dream of. "Flynn," she said after a while. Thank you for guarding my door all those years ago, for protecting my secret and the people I was trying to help. Thank you for letting me in. For trusting me with your secret and eventually with your heart." He turned to look at her, and even in the darkness, she could see the love in his eyes. "You made me a better man, Rebecca. You gave my life meaning beyond just survival. You gave me partnership when I thought I had to face everything alone. You gave me love when I had stopped believing I deserved it." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the familiar contours weathered by time and sun. "You gave me everything." They stayed on the porch until the stars came out in full brilliance, a canopy of light stretching across the Oregon sky. Inside the house, their grandchildren slept peacefully, safe and secure in a world that, while still imperfect, was better than the one Rebecca and Flynn had fought to change. The work of the Underground Railroad was long over. The war had been won, slavery abolished, though the fight for true equality continued. But Rebecca and Flynn had done their part. They had stood in the gap when it mattered most. They had risked everything for principle. And they had come through it together, their love not just surviving but thriving through the challenges they had faced. As they finally rose to go inside, Flynn took Rebecca's hand one more time. It was an echo of that first partnership they had formed so long ago, when a cowboy had discovered a woman's dangerous secret and chosen to guard her door rather than expose her. That choice had changed both their lives irrevocably, had set them on a path neither could have predicted. But it was a path they had walked together, hand in hand, through danger and darkness into light and love. And as they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Rebecca knew that she would make the same choices again. Would hide Runaways under her floorboards. Would accept Flynn's help when he offered it. Would fall in love with the man who stood beside her through everything. Because this life, this love, this legacy they had built together was worth every risk, every sacrifice, every moment of fear. They had made a difference in the world. They had saved lives and changed the course of history in their small way. And they had found each other in the process. Two souls united by common purpose who discovered they were meant for so much more than just partnership. They were meant for love, enduring and true and powerful enough to change the world. And in the end, that was the greatest victory of all. The final years of their lives were peaceful ones. Rebecca passed away first at the age of 78, surrounded by her husband, children, and grandchildren. She went quietly in her sleep, her hand clasped in Flynn's, a peaceful smile on her face. At her funeral, people came from hundreds of miles away to pay their respects. Former slaves who remembered her kindness, their children and grandchildren who had grown up hearing stories of the brave woman who had risked everything to help strangers find freedom. Flynn lived another 3 years without her, and those who knew him said he was never quite the same. He still worked the ranch, still played with his grandchildren, still participated in town life. But there was a loneliness about him, a sense of waiting. On the anniversary of Rebecca's death, Flynn asked his eldest son Thomas to take him to Rebecca's grave. He sat beside the headstone for hours, talking to her the way he had talked to her every day of their marriage, telling her about the grandchildren, about the state of the ranch, about how much he missed her. "I will see you soon, my love," he said as the sun began to set. "Wait for me just a little longer." He passed away that night, peacefully in his sleep, just as Rebecca had. They buried him beside her, and on the joint headstone, Thomas had inscribed the words that best captured his parents' legacy. Rebecca Lawson Northwood and Flynn Andrew Northwood. Partners in justice, united in love, forever in peace. They hid runaways, guarded doors, and changed the world. Their story became legend in Oregon, passed down through generations. Historians wrote about them in books documenting the Underground Railroad's western routes. Their house was eventually preserved as a historical site, the hidden space beneath the floorboards left intact as a reminder of what had once been necessary in the fight for freedom. But more than their historical significance, Rebecca and Flynn Northwood were remembered for their love story. The cowboy who discovered a dangerous secret and chose to protect rather than expose. The widow who took a chance on trusting a stranger. Two people who came together in shared purpose and discovered a love deep enough to sustain them through decades of challenge and triumph. Their descendants carried on their legacy, generation after generation choosing professions and causes dedicated to justice and compassion. Teachers and lawyers, doctors and activists, all inspired by the example of two people who had risked everything because it was the right thing to do. And on quiet evenings in Oregon, when the sunset painted the sky gold and crimson, people would sometimes swear they could see two figures walking hand in hand across the old Northwood ranch. A tall man and a slender woman, their heads bent together in conversation, their love visible in every gesture. Whether ghost or memory, or simply the power of a story well told, the legend persisted. Rebecca and Flynn Northwood had lived, had loved, had fought for freedom and found happiness in the struggle. They had proven that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when guided by conscience and supported by love. Their story was finished, but its impact rippled forward through time. Every person who learned about them and chose to stand up for what was right. Every couple who faced challenges together and emerged stronger. Every individual who looked at injustice and decided to act rather than turn away. In all these ways and more, Rebecca and Flynn Northwood lived on. Not in the flesh, but in the values they embodied and the love they shared. Their story was complete, their ending as happy as any two people could hope for who had lived lives of purpose and passion. They had hidden runaways under the floorboards for years. A cowboy had discovered the secret and guarded the door. And in the process, they had found everything worth having in life: purpose, partnership, and a love that would echo through generations. This was their legacy. This was their triumph. And this was their happy ending, earned through courage, sealed with love, and remembered with honor. The Wild West had tested them. Love had sustained them. And together, they had changed their corner of the world, one hidden soul at a time, one brave choice after another, until their small acts of rebellion became part of the great sweep of history. Their story was done. But its power, its truth, and its testament to the strength of love in the face of danger would live forever.